Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 2, Episode 18. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Steve, you spent decades with, as part of your career, with department stores. And when I think of department stores, I think about fashion, and I think of apparel, and I think of beauty, and I think of footwear. But I think of them in a very conventional sense. In other words, as menswear and women's wear. It feels like that department stores over the past, 100 plus years are pretty much the same. If you walked into one today and you walked into one 100 years ago, the structure would be the same. I'm not sure they've kept up with the changes in society.
A lot of the changes have certainly been incremental. I mean, I think if you think about department stores, they're called department stores because they have departments, which is both a physical manifestation that we're all probably pretty familiar with, but it's also, at least in my experience, an organizational manifestation. You have a buyer for Missy's, you have a buyer for men's sportswear, etc. And so that, I think, that physical structure, that's organizational structures, made it very difficult to respond to a lot of consumer changes. But certainly, as we'll talk about with Rob, there's very much this, men's versus women's versus kids kind of setup. And within kids, as we got into with Bridget Brennan on an episode last year, just how brands and retailers have conventionally thought about men's versus women's, pink for girls, blue for boys. Right. A lot of these really kind of anachronistic ways of thinking have still, for the most part, not evolved very much. So, it's a real challenge. It's been slow to change, and we'll get into with Rob Smith from the Phluid project some different ways of thinking about that, both in terms of customer segments that are neglected, perhaps underappreciated, but also represent an opportunity to develop some upside business and just fundamentally to treat people as they want to be treated.
Well, I like picking up on that last point. I really like and think that retail, given, the number of people it employs across the world, in Canada, it's the number one private sector employer, millions and millions of people in the United States, probably number 2 or 3. I think retail as an industry has an outsized influence, and I would say as well responsibility for, both reflecting and being an important factor in change. And that could take on a number of different elements, but it can be a very important connector, and it can be a win-win-win scenario, right? In other words, we can reflect society, we can be more inclusive, and we can sell better because we think people are looking for those. And you can actually, I feel you can move the needle, move the line if retail gets involved like almost no other industry.
Well, to your point, when you think about the sheer numbers of folks that work in the retail industry, when you think about the important brands, whether we're talking about the manufacturer brands or the retailers themselves, we think about retail as such a big component of local communities and the tax base. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a powerful force on a lot of dimensions. And so the more that the industry as an organized body, we're going to have Matt Shea from the NRF on, I guess, next week.
Week after next, actually. Yeah, week after next.
There's a lot of different ways that society can be made better by virtue of organizing collectively to do that, but also what brands can do and model for others and reflect on their employee base.
Well, speaking of powerful and change and comprehensive, all those words and many more come to my mind after we had our chat with our great guest. Tell the listeners all about it.
Yeah, well, we've got Rob Smith from the Phluid project and Get Phluid on. As I mentioned in the interview, I first saw Rob speak at Shop Talk about 3 years ago, and not only was I impressed with the business idea and the brand that Rob and team were developing, I just felt like he was such a powerful and articulate spokesperson for a movement for purpose. So delighted to have him on the podcast to tell us how he got to where he got to and where he is going with the brand and the business and some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion training they're doing as well.
Yeah, such a veteran retailer as well, including we both worked at Levi's, but senior positions in retail. So both brings that intersection of the personal, professional, and really brings it to life in this interview. So let's have a listen.
Well, we're delighted to welcome Rob Smith to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we've actually, this has been a little while to get there, which is mostly our fault, but we've wanted to have you on the podcast for some time. So I'm glad we finally made it happen. What we love to do when we get started is learn a little bit about you, your journey to your current position, and any other kind of color commentary you might want to provide. And then we'll dive into talking about the Phluid project.
I'll start with just how I ended up in retail, which was an absolute fluke. But I ended up, with an accidental interview and ended up going into retail and spent 30 years in traditional retail, 22 years at Macy's, 2 years at Victoria's Secret, and then 5 years with Levi's and Nike, creating kids' clothes, basically, globally, overseeing that. And then I decided to find my purpose in life, look for an altruistic reason to live, my dharma, I guess, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I quit my job, threw in a backpack, and decided to travel around the world and discover what the world had. And I wasn't sure what I was going to come back with. I kind of thought I was going to be a politician, but through a shamanic ceremony, I decided to, the Phluid project came to me as an idea of, and it's a merging of my profession, which is retail, and my passion, which is social justice. Mm-hmm. And through that merging of the two, the Phluid project was born. And that was born on April 17th, 2017. And I opened the space March 1st, 2018. So it happened pretty darn fast.
Would you be willing to share a little bit about to bring my own stuff into this? I mean, I ended up leaving a big corporate job, partially, somewhat similar reasons, but I was finding that big corporate cultures were becoming very stifling for me. And probably more of it was, to feel like I could get more done generally. My more purpose-driven stuff started a bit later, but are you willing to reflect a little bit on your corporate time, what was good about it, what was bad about it, and then maybe we'll kind of shift more specifically into the Phluid project and what that's about.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really lucky that I was able to get to the part where I came out of the closet, and I was living in Miami at the time, and I became a bit of a rebel, and I wore makeup and would pierce my ears and refused to wear a blazer, but I was really good at what I did, and they put up with me and tolerated me. Macy's continued to tolerate me, and I'd say I was a bit of a maverick at the company, and was the opposite of the way everyone else looked and acted, and yet they kept promoting me. And at a certain point, it was, they was considering putting me in the C-suite, and they hired a career coach for me, or a speaking coach, but it wasn't a speaking coach. It was actually a coach to tell me how to dress, how to blend in, and showing me how all the rest of the C-suite looked. And I was wearing, of course, like a skinny suit and a hot pink shirt and a Gucci tie and pointy shoes.
Which is probably not the rest the way the rest of the
It is not the way everyone else looked, especially.
I don't know. I mean, I could see Terry Lundgren rocking that look 100%.
Terry was, a sharp dresser for sure, but more, I would say, Armani than than what I was rocking was just probably Dolce, mm-hmm. And so anyways, I decided that I probably had gone as far as I could at the company. I had a great experience. I launched employee resource groups. I led, I was mentoring lots of young people. I really was in a groove there, and appreciated everything I had. But there was a time to move on, and I went to Victoria's Secret. I wanted to learn vertical. I wanted to learn direct to consumer. And I did learn that. I didn't like the culture there, to be honest. It wasn't a good fit for me culturally. And then I went to a family business. I was able to bring all this knowledge I had and experience to a really thriving, or a potential business of a family business, but they only knew, family business, third generation. So I brought structure and discipline to that business, and the business, we had a road to $1 billion, and they told me this year they got to $1 billion, which was pretty exciting. About 2 years after I left, or 3 years after I left. So that felt good to know that that strategy worked.
So how much of the Phluid I mean, as you said earlier, I mean, some of it was, to be more purpose driven. I I get that. It sounds like, you get to express yourself individually more completely. How did the specific idea coalesce, and at least tell us what the Phluid project was at the outset, and then we'd love to talk about how it's evolved.
I was living two separate lives. I was living that retailer during the day and that social justice person at night. And it wasn't until I was, alone in the Amazon, sitting with myself, and this idea of like, wow, kind of came to me through a really cool experience. I'm not sure I'm going to go too deep into what that was, but I couldn't wait to bring it back to life. I couldn't wait and just to make it happen. And I literally did it with all of my own money. I shared the idea with some folks about this gender-free store, grounded in community, built on activism, and really grounded in values and inclusion and then an education platform as well. I wait for people to educate, and there was we had a social code in the store, and it was we're all students or we're all teachers, and I became a student there for 2 years as the store was open. Every day we had events. We had 250 events in 2 years, and I was able to listen and learn from young people, sit through these panels and observe and learn. And I started as I became a student. And then I became a teacher, started to speak to corporations and travel around the world and speak at conferences and learn about this new generation. And it was incredible. I still continued to do that, but the store was an opportunity for me to just sit there and absorb and one, to like take an abstract idea and to make it tactile, for people to say, what does gender free mean? And they'd walk in the store and they kind of get it. They go, I got it. They leave. And
right.
Yeah. And it's certainly for non-binary folks, gender expressive folks. Talking about David Bowie, the way David Bowie would have expressed himself differently, not in a typical, normative way, like the way we would expect a man to dress. And then there's, trans folks and queer folks. And at the end of the day, it was really for everybody. It's really an opportunity for everyone to be curious and playful and say, I've never thought about trying that on, but maybe I will, because you weren't crossing over into this other aisle, this other section, which is almost like a taboo for anyone to do that of one gender to another.
So from a moment of inspiration in 2017 to a store opening in 2018, a lot of evolution has felt like it happened to the brand. Take us through that a little bit. I mean, you mentioned you had a store that you had and then closed. Perhaps that was related to the pandemic, or maybe it's the evolution of the brand because you've got some depth of experience in DTC. But take us a little bit through that, and take the listeners through, if they're standing in your store, how did you approach the merchandising, some of that practical stuff, but then also this evolution of the brand in your mind. I mean, you may have been early, but you seem very timely right now. So talk about that and how it's evolved, and how in some ways society's evolved, not evolved exactly, but caught up in some ways to the concept.
Sure. The store, the curation of the store was fun. I went to a trade show and I realized really quickly how binary it was, and how there's men's looks this way and women's looks this way. So about half of the product in the store I created myself. It was through fitting and putting in a male and a female fit model, and creating, products that were created by us, designed by us.
All right.
A team that I put together.
And you're basically creating a whole new category. So I imagine walking the trade show floor wasn't wildly productive.
It was not productive. I literally circled Vegas for 4 days during Magic and walked away with almost basically nothing,
Yeah. Color
I
cues
was able to work with
maybe.
some of the relationships I had, and I merchandise stuff together from the men's and the women's line, like from Levi's and from Fila and from Champion. I was able to, kind of make this really cool collection of mixing men's and women's together. And that was neat. And also about a quarter of the store was pop-ups. It was young designers, and we would do a profit share. And so there was a really cool fashion element that changed out every 30 days of pop-ups. So it had a cool artsy feel as well as a commercial feel. And then a feel of the, just t-shirts with really great messaging, powerful messaging. And so it was, from a product standpoint, and there was certainly beauty and shoes and fragrances and accessories, and it was just it had everything. It was like a little mini department store except for home, and it had all of it, all the elements in there, and it was fun to curate it and really make it look special. And so we opened up, and people started to notice. The press was unbelievable. There was so much press that store generated just by the sheer existence of it and curiosity. And then to have all these events and collaborations, it just kept generating more and more and more news and awareness globally. It's pretty terrific. And all of this was done, like I said, I never had an investor, just did it with my own money. And that was, that had trying times, but certainly no one was telling me what to do, and no one could see the future the way that I saw the future. I saw this as the future. And the plan was to open up 13 of these stores around the world. And that was my initial business plan. And that shifted. But any decent, successful entrepreneurs knows how to pivot and take an idea and just keep pivoting, and follow your instinct.
How much of the physical retail plan was affected by COVID, though?
So actually I closed December 31st of 19. So,
okay.
I was fortunate for sure, with 3 months afterwards, the pandemic hit us, and I would have been devastated financially to have had that real estate, their responsibility. So just goes to show you when I think, if you believe in a higher power, believe in something that I closed at the right time for the right reason, because this idea is, been gifted to me, and it's my job to see it through. And the idea isn't just really selling clothes, but, changing people's minds and perspectives and opening them up a little bit. So it's a brand with a purpose, that's for sure. And a mission.
Well, you talk about purpose and mission. Steve, in his book, frames it also as, from a retail perspective, as special, not big. Last week we had on the CEO of Voodoo Donuts from Portland, right? And he came from the Starbucks world and, opening thousands and have one on every corner, not the objective for Voodoo Donuts. And it doesn't feel like, while you want this message to go global, it feels like you're there. You're special, not necessarily big. Is that how you think or conceptualize it? Or do you ever see a shop in Macy's with the Phluid project? Like, talk about how you see this evolving.
I see this as world domination. People ask me what I want.
Special and big, Steve. It's a new chapter. Special and big.
Why can't it be both? See, I'm very binary in my thinking, in a very different way.
Yeah, Steve,
and I'm not proud of that.
I want to show up with intention. I want to show up with credibility. I want to show up with purpose. I don't want it to be splattered everywhere. We've got some really interesting partnerships going on. So I'm beginning the conversations of a special partnership with Target, starting with education. And we've got product in 1,900 of their stores right now for Pride, which is pretty cool. And working with Nordstrom, I'm launching accessories and apparel collection this fall. And it's called a Green Label. It's sustainable. It's upcycled product, dead stock, that's been repurposed. And it's a completely gender-free, earth-friendly, responsibly made collection. And I'm now starting to pitch it to European retailers. So there's a chance that this brand will, in the next 6 to 12 months, be both in the Americas and overseas, which is exciting. And then Sephora, we launched the fragrances in Sephora.com. I'm hoping that the fragrance will continue to expand in this global platform. So I see the brand showing up. It's in 5,000 stores right now, which is pretty incredible and blows my mind.
Wow.
And I see the brand continue to be more, maybe less. Doesn't need to be 5,000 stores, but really showing up well. And with purpose, with companies that are moving forward and being progressive, and the companies that I'm working with are progressive thinking, and they're embracing this brand for what it stands for.
One of the things I love, and I'd love to come back a little bit on a strategy point, but and I'm sure you won't remember this, but I believe I saw you speak at Shop Talk maybe 3 years ago. I think you were on a panel talking about the Phluid project. And the thing that really captured the things that really captured my attention, number one, I definitely got a sense that you were, this was sort of your mission, like you had found this purpose for yourself, and that was guiding you, which I thought was, awesome. You don't often hear people talk about that. You were being more true to who you were, which is also awesome, which I think you don't hear a lot of people in retail say that publicly, which is tremendous. But I also felt that you had really uncovered, kind of as you were talking about earlier, just, this gap in the market, the so-called, as much as I hate this term, it's kind of the so-called white space, where you have this customer insight and a realization that there just wasn't a good product, a good branding experience, et cetera, for consumers that have spending power and just aren't having their needs met very well. So I'm curious, when you start to talk to some of these retail partners, there's this element which I think is great, where we're seeing a lot of companies get behind diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, these sort of higher purpose ideals. But sometimes that feels to me a little bit like it's PR, it's marketing, right? And then there's the business part of it. Is this a real significant market opportunity to really be intensely customer relevant for a significant set of consumers? How do you, that was kind of a rambly question, I realize, but how do you sort through all that? And in terms of getting traction with wholesale partners, and if you ever do come back into a retail format, how do you think about the business part of it versus sort of the higher set of, higher goals, higher purpose?
Yeah. So it's such a great question. Right now, because of financial reasons, I'm probably over distributing the brand and riding on this wave of inclusion and diversity and, riding on that. The plan is to scale that back when I have, more financial, better financial situation. And then one of the things that I've created the last year and a half, and it's really starting to ramp up, is I've created a Get Phluid, which is gender expansive training. So I'm training companies how to prepare for a gender expansive workforce. So ultimately my goal is that, and as I work with companies, the companies that I choose to wholesale to will also be trained and educated at the same time. So it becomes a 360 degree, relationship. So we're training corporate employees, we're training store employees, and we're selling products. So the entire corporation, like someone like Nordstrom or Sephora or Target, is not just selling the product, but they're also doing the work from the core of who they are and how their employees are as well. So it becomes the safe and affirming space that we created. The Phluid project exists at other retailers as well. And right. To me, then it starts to like expand and comes across like with authenticity and with integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an interesting approach to this kind of global domination, as you described it gently. In other words, let's cover all aspects of the brand. You're really stretching the brand. Is that how you see the evolution? Like if you and I were talking together a couple of years from now, is that how you see the brand evolving? You've talked a lot about what's next for you and what's next and what's happening today. So it feels like you've got great momentum in these overall brand directions, including the merch, which is fantastic in that many stores. Is that kind of sum it up, or is there something left?
To sum it up is continuing to find new marketplaces, the right partnerships in those markets to show up with education, to show up with product and product creation, to each one of them special and unique, and servicing their customers, and then pushing down these boundaries, these spaces we've created that are specifically male and female, and creating spaces in between it, whether it's for a young adult or it's for a parent who's trying to raise their child without traditional gender norms. These gender expectations of girls are going to be this way and boys are going to be this way. And there's more and more parents who are trying to raise their kids without this blue truck and this pink sparkle, dress. And they're working really hard to try to find product to fill that gap and that need. And Phluid is going to not just, is going to come in and it's going to help create that product in that space.
Do you see a flagship store fulfilling a role, or is that, skip by that and have this gathering place that isn't necessarily a store? Do you see that somehow in the future? You're clearly getting wide distribution, which elevates and accelerates the knowledge of the brand and the concept and your mission, really, what you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, I always like flagship stores because Phluid is more than just selling product. It is education, but it's also community. And for me, it's important to have a place that community can come together and also create content. It's everyone thinks about, what a flagship store is. What a flagship store is for me is a community gathering place, a place that could have a coffee shop, but also, converts to like a cocktail reception at night or a panel discussion, and a place that you can just create content. And what's so important now, as any business owner knows, content is key. Just creating content. If you have a flagship store, you can put money into that, and that just becomes the place where all the content's created for all the social platforms.
I think, we've talked about this many times on the podcast, that as much as there's this narrative of the retail apocalypse, we obviously see plenty of retail stores being open. But I think the other thing is this realization perhaps of the role of the store being different, right? Not just a place to go see stuff, buy it, take it home, but to your point, be able to do other things from a community or content experiential standpoint. One, I know we're coming up on our time, but I'm curious, just going back to something you said earlier about, and I'm not necessarily trying to get into any secrets about how you're financing this, but I'm curious, as you think about expansion, do you see a conflict between what you want to achieve from more of a purpose mission side and how that might intersect with what investors might want from an ROI standpoint? And I'm thinking about this. I have one company that I've advised that's doing quite well, but they have a big social impact part of their mission. And a lot of their investors have said, well, you could really expand your gross margins if you were to make this stuff in China. And the CEO rightly said, well, except that that's totally against the purpose of our brand. So yeah, we could, but then we wouldn't be what we are. And I realize that's not directly equivalent to your situation, but is there tension there between the pure kind of financial dynamics that a lot of investors want to see to get big quick, and some of the I would say much more elevated goals that you have?
Yeah, listen, there's tension all the time. There's tension between the retailer and the price, right? There's tension between, there's not investors at Phluid, but there hopefully will be one day. And if anyone's listening would like to invest in Phluid, I'd love to have a conversation. But right now, the tension is you're right, is the brand manager and the brand director of, making good decisions. But sometimes if you're working with a retailer and they want the t-shirt to be $12.99, you're going to have to ensure that it's made overseas, but there are factories that do, a really good job of creating product and taking care of their employees. So just because, you have to do the work. You have to find out that there's compliant factories and you're not working. And I think working with Nike and Levi's, I learned about that. I learned about the supply chain. I learned about, how to find factories that are, if they're working with Nike and Levi's, I can assure you that they're doing the work to be compliant. So, so there's ways to do inexpensive product to do it right. Is that the best way to do it? No, I'd rather use repurposed, recycled like t-shirts with plastic in it, and it's cost a little bit more, and hopefully more and more people are willing to pay a little more for repurposing.
Well, Rob, it's been a great exploration of both your background, your brand. I mean, you're really the epitome of this intersection. I often find, and Steve and I often talk to people where they intersect their personal and the professional lives. You're pretty much the epitome of that. So thanks so much for sharing. Thanks for your success.
I do want to say that I listened to a morning meditation. It was about living your purpose and your dogma. And and after I finished, I was thinking how many people would be like, God, really wish that was me. Like, how do I get there? And I felt so fortunate this morning that I am living my purpose right now. I feel like every day I wake up and I'm doing what I love to do, which is retail and fashion and now education, and make an impact and getting to, open people's minds and hearts, and just feel like the luckiest guy in the world right now.
Well, I share that because you joined us. Thank you for joining us. Literally, it's great to hear your story, and it's an interesting story from a whole bunch of different perspectives. So thanks again. Wish you continued success, and we'll do our part by hopefully lots of folks will listen to the podcast, and I'm sure it'll resonate with them. So thanks again for joining.
Check out the Phluid Project with a PH, stands for balance. So check out the Phluid Project, and check it out, and shoot me an email if let me know what you think. I'm pretty accessible on every platform.
All right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Right on.
Michael and Steve, I appreciate it.
All right, welcome to another edition. Welcome back, I should say, to Remarkable or Forgettable. Steve, it seems like deja vu all over again. Analysts, earnings. Analysts get it wrong. Blockbuster earnings. What's going on?
Well,
Let's
the
talk
analyst
about
thing, I still am mystified. We had, 8 or 9, 10 big retailers report their earnings in the last week. And I believe in every case, they beat analysts, by a long shot, both on the sales and earnings side. So it is remarkable that I guess we listen to these folks anymore, because they don't seem to have a good idea of what's going on.
Or have a calendar handy, or like to have maybe they don't have a calendar handy, and
their abacus.
Forget about last year.
I'm not. It's hard to explain, and we're not going to do a TikTok of whatever that expression is of each of the earnings. But there are a couple I thought were interesting. Nordstrom, the story was that they really underperformed, and I think this was because we saw a bunch of department store apparel retailers report, and many of them had 60, 70, 80% increases, and Nordstrom's was much more muted. I didn't find it particularly surprising, because I think the higher end retailers, the retailers that are selling products to go out, to go to more formal events, those kinds of things. I mean, clearly those sort of wearing occasions, as we say in the biz, have not really returned quite yet, as opposed to those that are selling athleisure, casual, that sort of stuff. So that wasn't particularly, I think that story was forgettable. I think Nordstrom, Neiman's, those sort of retailers are going to have some positive comparisons as we go forward, but I'm not sure they're really going to get back to where they were for at least another 6 months. Let's talk about Saks and their announcement about their marketplace. So they didn't take your advice. They did divide the company. They haven't paid my invoice for that advice either. So I guess. So what now they're up to like another step in the rapid evolution of the luxury business marketplace. It seems. I'm generally pretty negative. So I think it's pretty forgettable. Marketplaces for this sort of retailer, I think, have to be pretty incremental. I think it's nice to offer this wider selection, and certainly you can leverage traffic that you get to maybe sell some additional items that you don't have to have the inventory carrying costs and all that kind of stuff. But when you think about the sort of brand that Saks is, which is built on experience and personal service, having a bunch of other stuff that's going to get drop shipped from some company, to me, is not especially compelling. So nice incremental opportunity. In terms of whether this really makes a big difference in terms of their strategic positioning, I think it's totally forgettable. Let's talk about private label, private brands at Target and BBB. Remarkable or forgettable? I mean, private brands aren't new, but they seem to have a bit of, I don't know, is Renaissance the wrong word? I'm a little bit on the fence in terms of, I don't think this is forgettable, but you're absolutely right. Private brands are not new. I think from a Target perspective, they're really leaning into this very hard. They've consolidated some of their private brands, and they keep announcing, it seems like, more investment behind private brands or partnerships with relatively narrowly distributed brands, like some of these digitally native vertical brands. So from a Target perspective, it's not especially remarkable, except I think strategically, particularly when you compare it to what Walmart is doing. This is a big point of differentiation, and I think they're just kind of stepping on the gas for that. For Bed Bath & Beyond, they've been going through this big renaissance under new leadership, and the news this week was a bit more about what they're doing with private brands. And what's remarkable here, I guess, it's remarkable that Bed Bath & Beyond went so long without having a compelling private brand strategy. That's pretty amazing, really, when you think about
that's fair.
how much of a playbook this has become for retailers for decades, but also particularly in this environment when you're trying to avoid getting comparison price shopped on Amazon or other places. So I think it's interesting. We'll see how much traction it gets, but certainly for Bed Bath & Beyond, this looks like a core piece of their strategy going forward.
Let's talk about Google's announced they're going to open their first store. My first response was, it's not their first store. I was in their store that was, I guess, a pop-up in Soho a couple of years ago. Against somebody else snuck another playbook out and said, let's open stores.
Well, I certainly don't think it's unexpected, right? So from that standpoint, it's forgettable. Whether this is really part of a bigger strategy, that's the thing to watch. I kind of doubt it. My dream, though, is that I just organize like 100 people to walk up to the desk there and just say, what's the best sushi place near me? Like that's that. I don't think that's what it is.
Is that what the story is?
I think it would just be funny to like hide a camera and just have people do that, and then have the sales associates want to strangle you. But it'll be interesting to see how this manifests. Google does. They're trying to double down on shopping. They have some products to sell. So interesting. Probably not a major move to spend that much time paying attention to.
All right, last but maybe least, Gap and Walmart team up. This feels like two people walking down an aisle. One person's got a piece of chocolate, another person's got a peanut butter, and they bump into each other at a corner. Like I don't usually say these two in the same sentence, and now they're building product for home.
One of the great headlines, well, it wasn't specifically a headline, but just kind of the take on this was that, Gap brings cool to Walmart. And I'm like, huh? I haven't thought about Gap being cool for, I was going to say, I was kind of like flashing back to my high school years or something. And of course, Gap is very well known for their home products. So forgettable. I guess let's just cut to the chase. What I think this speaks to, kind of even going back to the private brand discussion with Target and Bed Bath & Beyond, is so many retailers need to find that point of differentiation with their product offering. And in many cases, it's kind of like, even though that didn't work out so well, what we did with Land's End at Sears, how do you get a brand that's well known, that's not widely distributed or not distributed in this sort of channel, to bring you traffic, bring you a little edge, not able to be price shopped at Amazon or, so strategically, I kind of get it. I don't get Gap and I don't get home in kind of the same sentence. So forgettable is my official pronouncement.
Well, all right, let's leave it there for a somewhat occasionally baffling episode of Remarkable or Forgettable. All right, Steve, take us home.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our guest interviews and insights, and new episodes will show up every week. And please take a minute to drop us that elusive 5-star rating and tell a friend in the retail industry. I'm Steve Dennis. The expanded and completely revised second edition of my best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, is now available at Amazon, Indigo, bookshop.org, or just about anywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast, and you can learn more about me on LinkedIn or on meleblanc.co. Steve, have a safe week.